Hey guys, today we're going to try to answer the question, what should I eat? And in particular, we're going to try to answer that question from a health perspective. There are lots of other considerations that might go into answering this question. Some people might have certain religious beliefs or certain cultural practices, or they might belong to a certain social group, or they might have ethical concerns about what they eat or environmental concerns. All of those are important considerations to take into account. But they're not going to be what we're concerned with today. Today we're exclusively concerned with the question, what is going to make me the most healthy if I eat it, and what's going to make me the least healthy if I eat it. So we're going to focus on that exclusively. So we're going to talk about healthy food, unhealthy food, the things that fall under that rubric of things you want to eat and the things you want to minimize/avoid. And we're going to talk about the criteria that we use to evaluate whether a food is healthy or not. Okay. So let's start with the healthy food. So in terms of what you want to eat, first and foremost, at the vast majority of your meals, for health, you want to make sure to have some type of quality protein. Meat is a good example here, beef, pork, lamb, things like that. Fish and seafood are also going to be fantastic, salmon, halibut, scallops, so on and so forth. Any type of eggs is going to be something that's going to be nutritious for you. Especially the yolk, which is where all the nutrients are, not the whites. So those types of quality protein are going to be very, very healthy for you. You are going to get certain nutrients and certain forms of nutrients from quality protein that you cannot get in the same quantities or the same types that are absorbable by our body from just purely plant matter. So you need to have quality protein in order to get the necessary nutrients for health, specifically for health. Okay. Vegetables, both starchy and non-starchy. Starchy vegetables being things like white potatoes, sweet potatoes, yams, plantains, winter squash, things that have a decent amount of carbohydrates in them that can fuel certain high-intensity activities like CrossFit or other activities. But just in general, a normal human is going to need somewhere between 100 and 200 grams of carbohydrates a day, either from starchy vegetables or from fruits. Now, the amount that the standard American consumes of 300 to 400 grams of carbs a day is insane. But if you have them from starchy vegetables or from fruits, that's going to be a lot better. So you want to make sure to have some of those. Non-starchy vegetables, things like kale, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, carrots, parsnips, eggplant, so on and so forth. All of those are fantastically healthy. You burn more calories digesting them than they contain, and you should feel free to eat as many of them as you'd like from that non-starchy category. Healthy fats, avocado and avocado oil, olives and olive oil, coconut flakes, macadamia nuts, hazelnuts, ghee, which is clarified butter. All of those are going to be excellent fats to consume. And they're going to be really important for nutrient absorption. So fat-soluble vitamins like vitamins A, D, E, and K cannot be properly absorbed by your body unless they are consumed with fat. And those are very, very important vitamins, very important nutrients for your body. So you want to make sure you have some healthy fats, not just for vitamin absorption, but for also to help fuel your activities throughout the day. Excuse me. Now, these three, quality protein, vegetables, and healthy fats, are all three of them necessary for health. If you're missing any one, you're missing what is needed to be optimally healthy. Of course, you can survive eating, whatever, one of these you'd like, one or two you'd like, but if you want to be optimally healthy, you need all three. You need quality protein, vegetables, and healthy fats. Now, on the other hand, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, you don't need to be optimally healthy. However, they're delicious. They do have some great nutrients that you can use, and they make food a lot more enjoyable. So you should feel free to have fruits, for example. Just don't pretend as if they're a substitute for vegetables. They are not, in terms of their nutrient density and in terms of their carbohydrate content, but they are very healthy for you. Nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, they are all really great for you, so you should feel free to include them in what you eat. Now, why do these foods that I just listed fall in the healthy food category? I think it's really important to have this understanding, because otherwise it just becomes this thing of, well, someone said this was healthy and someone said this was unhealthy, but you don't understand the reason why, and you can't figure out for yourself what is ultimately healthy and unhealthy. So these reasons really help you personally determine how, healthy a food is going to be for you or not. So there are lots of other lists that have different criteria for whether food is healthy or not. Some of them overlap with these. But these are the criteria that I use when someone asks me, is this food healthy? These are the criteria I use personally when I ask myself, should I be eating this food for health? So, one, you want to have food that has lots of nutrients. I think everyone's going to agree to this, right? You want to have foods that have lots of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, antioxidants, things that nourish your body, positively nourish your body, that aren't just empty calories, right? These are things that are going to make you feel healthier. You want to have foods that don't spike blood sugar. Now, your blood sugar, pretty much no matter what you eat, with very few exceptions, is going to rise a little bit as a result of what you eat, and then it will come back down when your body produces insulin. That's okay. What's not okay is this rocket ship roller coaster of insulin spiking and blood sugar spiking that most of us are on due to excess carbohydrate and processed food consumption. That's really, really bad for our body, and most people are going to agree that you don't want to have foods that spike your blood sugar. We want to have food that is good, that's delicious, that's enjoyable. Obviously, you don't want to be on some sort of diet or health plan where you don't have enjoyable food. But you don't want to have food that's psychologically addictive, and that's a very important distinction. People, seem to think, well, in order to eat healthy, I have to give up delicious food. That's not true. For instance, like for me, one of my favorite meals is, steak, broccoli, and some, roasted broccoli and some roasted white potatoes. I think that's delicious, and I look forward to having it. But it's not psychologically addictive. It doesn't call out to you from the freezer. It's not like you're at the grocery store and the candy bars at the checkout counter are calling out to you, right? That's a very different type of thing, and that leads to an unhealthy relationship with food, where you use food as reward, as punishment. You have a psychological dependence on the food. That's not good. So we want to have foods that are healthy for us and delicious, but we don't want to have foods that are psychologically addictive, and that's part of the reason why these foods that are listed are over here, because they're not psychologically addictive. You want to have foods that promote healthy digestion. Most people today, or quite a few people today, have some sort of digestive issue of one sort or another. People are using proton pump inhibitors and Tums to try to deal with, reflux and heartburn, and people have constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloating, so on and so forth. The main cause behind most of those things is the foods you eat. And if you eat foods that are pro-inflammatory and that lead to an unhealthy digestive system, like we'll talk about in just a second, you're going to have an unhealthy digestive system. That's going to lead to poor nutrient absorption. It's going to lead to systemic and chronic inflammation. None of those things are good. We want to have foods that are non or anti-inflammatory. So just a quick primer here on inflammation. It's your body's emergency systems responding to an emergency. When you have a sprained ankle, or you get a cold, or you break your arm, inflammation or your body's emergency systems jump into place to try to fix the emergency. Inflammation can be good in those contexts, but when it becomes chronic because you only had 4 hours of sleep, or because you are really stressed out and you have a long commute and your boss is yelling at you, or you get very poor nutrients, or you don't get enough nutrients from your diet, or you don't work out enough. All of those things lead to chronic and systemic inflammation. Chronic meaning all the time, systemic meaning all over your body. That's not good. That's really, really, really bad for health. So we want to eat foods that don't cause inflammation and actually minimize inflammation. And lastly, we want to eat foods that do not cause or exacerbate autoimmunity. These foods over here in the unhealthy category, in one way or another, have all been shown to play a part in the development of autoimmune diseases via the pathway of leading to excessive inflammation, and in some cases, even beyond inflammation, just being a stimulant for the autoimmune process. So autoimmune diseases have kind of exploded on the scene recently. Things like multiple sclerosis, Graves' disease, Hashimoto's, rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes. They have been around for a while, but their numbers are exploding, and a large part of the reason is environmental factors, including diet. So we want to try to eat foods that heal, or at the very least do not exacerbate autoimmune diseases. Okay, so that's the healthy food and a little bit about why those foods are healthy. Now let's talk about unhealthy food. So the first three everyone's going to recognize, right? Processed foods. Don't want to have foods that could survive the apocalypse, that could, last on the shelf through a nuclear fallout or something like that. There's that saying that good food goes bad and bad food stays good. To a large extent, that's true. Good food, which is natural, decomposes, and bad food that kind of has all these preservatives in it could last you, 10 or 15 years. So processed foods, pro-inflammatory, lots of preservatives, lots of chemicals, no nutrients, really not great for you. Sugar, same thing. As we'll see in just a second, sugar is going to fail every single one of these good food standards, and it's going to be a bad food for that reason. Liquid calories, things like soda and alcohol that have no nutrients whatsoever. They don't positively contribute to your health in any sense whatsoever. And in particular, liquid calories tend to spike your insulin even more than, solid food that would contain sugar. So, before I go on, I should just say, does this mean you're giving these things up forever? Of course not. I was just saying to people recently around this time of year, if people had whatever they wanted for Halloween or for Thanksgiving or for Christmas, and then for the rest of the days out of the year, they were healthy, we wouldn't have any of the health issues that we currently run into. People would be perfectly healthy. The problem is when we consume these things all the time. So it doesn't mean cutting them out for the rest of your life, but you want to try to minimize them as much as possible. So those three everyone knows about. These three are a little bit more unique. We've talked about dairy already in a previous video, and we're going to talk about grains in another video, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about seed oils in a later video as well. But in general, you want to avoid grains, especially wheat. Wheat has little to no nutrients. It's very low on the nutrient scale, and the nutrients that it has, you can get in equal or greater quantities from vegetables and fruits. It spikes your blood sugar. It is psychologically addictive. It leads to unhealthy digestion. It's systemically inflammatory, and it has been shown repeatedly, especially gluten, to lead to or exacerbate autoimmune diseases. So in general, we want to avoid grains, especially wheat. Dairy is kind of a gray area. There are good forms and bad forms, but in general, the grain-fed, low-fat, non-fat, homogenized, factory farm-fed dairy that you buy in most stores is not going to be healthy for you. And then seed oils, things like canola, grapeseed oil, cottonseed oil, and margarine. Margarine is basically just a gigantic trans-fat-laden frankenfood that in no way, shape, or form is healthier for you than what it was originally meant to replace, which is butter. I would recommend to anyone, any day of the week, having butter for health over the frankenfood, the trans-fat-laden frankenfood of margarine. So seed oils are definitely something that are incredibly pro-inflammatory, and you're going to want to avoid. So why avoid these foods? You want to know why. Again, this is really important. You shouldn't just take my word for it that these foods are on the don't eat list. You should be able to critically evaluate what I'm saying according to these standards that are going to give us a good bearing on whether a food is healthy or not. So these foods have little to no nutrients. Like I said before, grains have some, dairy has some. It depends on the type you get, but you can get all the nutrients you need from these things over here without any of the bad stuff that comes from the lesser forms of these. The vast majority of these foods up here spike blood sugar in one way or another. Processed foods, sugar, liquid calories, grains, dairy, all spike blood sugar in one way or another. They send them on this roller coaster where your body has to desperately release insulin to bring your blood sugar back to a normal level, and repeated instances of that blood sugar spike lead to chronic and systemic inflammation. They're psychologically addictive. These foods do not call out to you from the freezer section or the grocery store checkout line like a candy bar does. Most of these foods do. When you ask people what they're addicted to, what they can't live without, food-wise, it's typically going to be these foods, right? So we want to have a healthy relationship with food where foods aren't psychologically addictive. These foods all in one way or another lead to unhealthy digestion. Again, reflux, diarrhea, constipation, bloating, gas, things like that are all products of the food that you eat. And if you eat garbage food, you're going to get garbage digestion. So this is something that we want to try to avoid. We want to try to promote healthy digestion. Again, these foods lead to chronic and systemic inflammation. Again, inflammation can be good if it is acute and local, meaning that it fixes your broken arm, or it fixes your sprained ankle, or it fixes your cold over the course of 3 to 4 days, and then the inflammation calms down. But when it's chronic, meaning all the time, and systemic all over your body, we run into major issues health-wise. And then lastly, these foods can lead to or exacerbate autoimmunity. Some through the mechanism of impairing digestion, some through the mechanism of leading to chronic and systemic inflammation, and some through actually themselves being themselves containing compounds that can actually lead your body to mistakenly attack certain tissues that it should not be attacking, healthy tissues like your thyroid or the myelin sheaths of your nerves, or the cells in your digestive tract, or the cells in your joints from rheumatoid arthritis. None of those things are good. So we want to try to eat foods that minimize, or at the very least do not exacerbate, autoimmunity. All right, guys. So hopefully by the end of this video, you have a sense of what you should eat from a health perspective. You should have a sense not just of the foods that are listed in each category, but why. You really have to understand the why here. Again, don't just take my word for it. Critically evaluate what I'm saying, and this is something that you can really just see for yourself. You can look at a nutrient table online and see that these foods, by and large, have way more nutrients than these foods. If you were to use a blood glucometer at home to measure your blood sugar, you could easily see that these foods aren't going to spike your blood sugar anywhere near as much as these foods. So there are ways for you to critically evaluate and see why these foods are in the categories that they are. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.